Hello, my name is Chris Foster. Thank you so much to the Han Phonology Project for having me here. I'm something of an interloper. I'm not a linguist. I'm interested in linguistics, as we'll see, obviously. I'm also not going to be presenting on graph or network theory. Also something I'm interested in. I'm at SOAS in London. I'm working on medieval Buddhist glossaries, and I'm interested in the relationship of citation practices. So I do want to do something with network theory, but more in terms of within a gloss, how are different reference works related to one another and why. So that's kind of where I'm coming in from that angle. But my first love has been reading these newly discovered excavated manuscripts. Dating from the Han period and a little bit earlier, written on wood and bamboo. And that's where I get into linguistics, because I'm really interested in, okay, how can we reconstruct the pronunciation of these old words, and how does that then inform us in terms of reading the manuscript itself? So when I get into this, what I'm interested in doing is then thinking about what do these excavated manuscripts tell us about historical reconstructions. How can we use this new data set for linguistics? And so basically, what I see here is an opportunity, and that a lot of the historical reconstructions for Old Chinese in particular have been based on one specific text, and all these texts that have been transmitted over time through the centuries that have been subjected to editorial interventions. But here we have this massive new corpus of data that we can then test that against, right, and find problems. So basically, that's what I want to do. I want to take sort of theories that have been developed from looking at the transmitted corpus, the received corpus, test it on excavated manuscripts. And in particular, I've picked, in terms of the excavated manuscripts, scribal primers. I do this for a number of reasons. Primers, this is a site where learning to read and write first happened. So it's part of education. It's part of a standardization process that was happening during the Han Dynasty. It is also a fairly robust corpus. So here I'm looking at one particular text called the pian. We now have it in, I believe, 18 different caches. You can see it from all across China, East Coast, Northwest, into Central, and a little bit Southwest. So we have a good geographic range. And what's really interesting too is that we can take these texts and we can use them to anchor language usage in a specific time and place, right? We know, maybe not in terms of the composition of the text itself, but in terms of one reception event. So we know that we can date this one manuscript to Gansu from the 1st century BCE, which is really helpful when we're testing these, especially how does language change over time and in place, right? Another aspect of this corpus that I think is really useful is that these primers tend to be based on structural rhymes. So the organizing logic behind what are ultimately just a list of random terms isn't so much the content. There is sort of clustering of semantic relationships, but it's rhyming. So in particular with the Cang Jie, each chapter will participate in a single rhyme scheme. You'll see that there's 4 character lines. There's a rhyme always after the every second line, right? And so what this does is it takes away some of that guesswork of, is this a rhyming relationship or is it not? This could be a problem, and when we get into the data, you can challenge me on this, but as sort of my base assumption, I'm going to prioritize these structural rhymes over, reconstructions. So what I wanted to test in particular, in terms of picking just a random theory, has been this theory about Old Chinese having a final R, and that then changing into a final N or a final J. So this is forwarded by Baxter and Sagart. They are adopting the theory from Starostin. Basically, where this comes from is that there's been the observation that certain words have both Middle Chinese final N and final J readings, right? And so how does that happen? Or certain characters have this. We also see rhyme contacts in Old Chinese between characters that have Middle Chinese pronunciations of N and J. So at some point, these split off in a different way. And so the hypothesis is that, oh, well, way back in time in Old Chinese, they had a final R and then eventually they split off, with the change from R to N being a mainstream change, and then the change from R to J being something that perhaps happened in a dialect. There's an idea that maybe this is an East Coast Shandong, and that although that wasn't adopted into the mainstream, some of this survives into Middle Chinese. Okay. So now another apology in that this talk isn't really sort of a polished paper. I don't have conclusions to give you, really. I have some suggested conclusions, but really what I wanted to do is just go in a rough sort of chronological order from latest into older primers. I was going to show you the data and just give you a few thoughts about what the data is like, and actually really use this as more of as an actual workshop and get your sort of help and your thoughts on it. So the first text that I was going to look at is called the Jizhou Pian. This is the only text of the bunch that has survived into the received corpus, mainly actually through calligraphy. It was used as a calligraphy model from some very famous calligraphers like Wang Shizhi. So we do have versions of this in our received corpus. We also have manuscript discoveries, and so there's a few here. We have a wooden prism that dates to the Han period. We have another paper version, a paper manuscript witness that's slightly later. Because a lot of the rhyming that I'm going to show you is based on the received text, I'm treating it as late stuff, right? So it's potentially Han Dynasty, but there's potentially editorial interventions as well. So here's some of the data. Basically, what I see when I see this is an inconclusive about what the status of R is in this text. So what you see here in the highlighted in blue is a rhyme series that has been proposed by Luo Chongpei and Zhou Zumo. The Jizhou Pian isn't as strict in its structural rhymes as the Sanjie Pian. So we see that there are chapters that are wholly based on a single rhyme series, but it's not inevitably the case. So there could be this sort of grouping could be wrong. But again, I'm going to start with that as my sort of baseline. It appears here that, well, there's two interpretations of the material that you can give. One is that R has already changed to N. And the reason I say that is because we have, towards the end, we have this yuan, which has a definitive N in its Old Chinese reconstruction. And then we have words like qian. See here, yeah. So yen, and then we have qian here, which has a definitive R in its Old Chinese reconstruction. And these reconstructions, by the way, are those that are proposed by Baxter and Segart with some fairly mechanical modifications to update some of the changes that happened during the Han that have been proposed, as Dash pointed out earlier, right? So one reading of all this is that, okay, we have, R is rhyming with N here. And so therefore, there must be a change. Sorry. So it appears that R has changed to N. However, if you'll see here, there's a lot of sort of indefinite sort of propositions for the finals, right? So this may be N, it may not be, maybe N, may not be, and so forth. So if you look at sort of where stuff is being clumped together, it's possible that there is a smaller sort of subseries here where R is actually separated from N, and then that would suggest that R hasn't changed to N, right? So it's inconclusive. Where can I point that out? So maybe like, here there is a little bit of that going on. There's other issues with this data set. So like, I don't know why, here we have bien and there's the vowel E, whereas everything else has the main vowel of A. But again, I'm prioritizing sort of the rhyme series over reconstructions, and so it's not going to bother me so much. Here's another series from the Jie pian. So this reflects it a little bit better in terms of what I'm saying about subseries. So we have R, final R rhyming with final N. One way of interpreting all of this is that, okay, R has already changed to N. But here it's interesting that we have sort of three words that potentially have R kind of grouped together. And then we have the words with N being grouped together towards the end, right? So is there a divide here? Are these two different rhyming series versus one longer rhyming series? And I think if it was one longer, if R had already changed to N, and this is indeed one long rhyming series, and you start to see R popping up in more isolated incidents, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Did you say whether this is Western?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, this is 1st century BCE in terms of, so the traditional association is that this was composed by a fellow named Shuryo in 40 BCE. However, I'm not treating it as late Western BC, late Western Han, because we're using a transmitted version. So basically what I'm thinking about this is like, this is sort of said to be a Han text, but because we're using data that's passed through so many hands, there could be later interventions. And so I think what really excites me about the Han phonology project is that a lot of these attributions for supposedly Han texts are incorrect and late. Right, so like a lot of this poetry and these poetry collections are medieval, and what I want to be able to do is be able to go back and do exactly what you were doing before. And it's like, okay, let's guess where this comes from, and be like, oh, this isn't actually a Han poem. This is a much later poem. So I'm kind of treating this text in that frame that this could be a Han text. We have an attribution, we have an idea, but we're not so sure. There's a couple other things that really bother me about this series in particular. One is this sure here. I have no idea why that's in this series or what could be going on. I give a whole long little bit of sort of hypothesis here that I don't think we really need to get into. But also I find that in a lot of these series we get ren, which I change here to a final N, but in the Old Chinese is a voice velar nasal, the and you see a lot of voice velar nasals appearing in these series, and I don't know what's going on there and why that's the case. And in fact, you can see that here as well. Yeah, so here's ren again with jun, so that ing, it's turned into in, now with an R. Here we might have a smaller sub-series. There's a definitive R, and then an unknown. Could be an N, but it could be an R too. So is this an isolated sort of smaller rhyme within other rhymes that are going on, or is this all one long series? Yeah.
Is this Middle Chinese? Captures Middle Chinese on the
Yeah, sorry. So Old Chinese on the left, the rhyme word, and then this is Middle Chinese.
Have you looked at shoes with stuff?
In terms of late Han, yeah. So thank you for sending that. I just haven't had time to put that in, but
oh, okay, that's where you want that.
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
exactly. Yeah. for Schussler, the late Han, yeah. No, thank you for that. And so another issue, speaking about, okay, are there smaller subseries of rhyming here, is the vowels as well. So we have a lot of schwais, but then towards the end here, it starts to get into, I's, a lot of I as the main vowel. So what's going on there? In general, I've been basing a lot of this on just looking at the coda, the final, and not including the main vowel there, even though I know strictly speaking, it should be main vowel plus coda, but that does not seem to be the case often, even with my most strictly structured primers. Yeah. Not sure if there's anything I want to get into here. Okay. So let's turn next to the Cang Jie pian. So the Cang Jie pian, there is an imagined attribution to it as well, going back to the Qin dynasty. Supposedly famous figures like Li Si and Zhao Gao had their hand in this. I think it's mostly hogwash. I think this is a story that was imagined in the late Western Han when they were ridiculing the Qin and they wanted to paint these figures in a negative light. The Cang Jie pian, as I mentioned before, each chapter has its own one rhyme series. It's every sort of 8th character or every 2 4-character lines. What we have here, I'm not going to start with the base text of that, but what we have here is a manuscript that was discovered fairly recently in 2009 out in Gansu in northwest China. It takes the base text of the Cang Jie pian, and then it adds at the very end of every line 3 characters that start up their own rhyme series, which still is the same rhyme series throughout every chapter, but it's a novel rhyme series, right? And this dates to the late sort of 1st century BC, right? So this is our first sort of date and place anchor, late 1st century BCE. And here we have sort of a new rhyming series. And this is where we have our strongest sort of evidence of R sort of being retained in the text. So here we have yin, which is rhyming with Jun, and then also Shi, and I'm obviously using sort of modern pronunciations. But obviously, so we have Middle Chinese N, Middle Chinese ends with N, Middle Chinese ends with J, right? So this would suggest to me that in this one manuscript for whoever compiled this commentary to the Cang Jie pian, they did not differentiate between N and J yet. It was R for these words. And what's also interesting about this is that because it's a commentary, it doesn't seem to have been very widely distributed or popular. This is the only instance we have of this. My sense is that this is a very local composition, and so this might help us get at whatever's going on in the Northwest, right? Like this could be a vernacular and a dialect. There is a problem, however, in that we have another series up here in the same manuscript where there is the incorporation of ren in what otherwise could be all R's. So inconclusive, 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 all the way down. The only thing we have here is Jun, which is a definitive R. All of these could be final R, but then we have ren, right? And it seems pretty clear that this word could not have been final R. So how do we explain that, right? And I'm not sure. I'm wondering if somehow it's anticipating the next rhyme, because the chapter after this then switches to voiced velar nasals. So maybe we have sort of, the final word of this rhyming group is actually not part of the series, but then anticipates the next, and it's a memorization aid for, okay, now we need to move on to the next chapter. But that's a problem that I don't know how to resolve yet. Okay, so now we're going on to the actual base text of the Cang Jie pian. There's a number of witnesses to this. The one that I am going to pretty much solely use here is what's called as the village teachers edition of the text. And this one very strictly only does 60 words, 60 characters per chapter. And it's best seen on what's called the Han board manuscript. Unfortunately, this is not an archaeologically excavated manuscript. It was in a collector's sort of a collection. So we don't know in terms of time and place anchors. It's not as strong of evidence, but we do have this same edition, this village teachers edition, in other witnesses that have been archaeologically excavated. It tends to be somewhat later than the base text of the Cang Jie pian from pre-village teachers editions, which I'm not going to get into here. But again, I'm thinking this is more like late, or let's just say 1st century BC. I think maybe the most important point to highlight here is this character Kun, where we see in what is otherwise a series with final J, there could be this word that has a definitive N. It seems here that R if there was a final R in Old Chinese. By this point, for this linguistic community, this word had changed that final R to a J. All right. So this is probably the most exciting bit of data that I've encountered with these primers. Unfortunately, this is only attested on that one Han board manuscript. So that's the big caveat, the big asterisk. If this turns out to be the case, though, if we can find and eventually get more data that shows that there was a change from R to J for the base text of the Cang Jie pian, that'd be really super interesting, and it actually get us into questions about, okay, where was the Cang Jie pian composed? And we can start to sort of speculate about, oh, from an author who has connections to the east coast of China. And that gets us back into this sort of imagined affiliation with Li Si and Zhao Gao and all these other figures. So there's a lot that I think could be done. I guess what I'm just trying to show how like these linguistic theories can then come and challenge these attributions and get us into sort of the social histories of these texts, which I think is really fascinating. There is one, I don't know if you can really see the data that well, but there's this character here, right? Cheng, which again is this voiced velar nasal in this whole J series. So this is another instance. I don't know why this is happening, but this just seems to be happening all the time with these primers. Here is a, yeah.
The J mixes with the a lot.
Not, so this is one of the only times that, I'm trying to think of if the other series are J series. Not as much as with the N series. There might be, we'll look at there's one more set for the Weili Jirdao type sites. There may be an instance in there, but I don't think so. I think this might be the only time that's in the J series. But in other series where I think R is retained, it's still there, even though those are then series that mainly seem to be words that change later to N. So here is another primer. This one is a prism, so it's one of these like longer sticks of wood that have 4 sides. There's writing on each side of the wood. It was discovered in 1979, also out in Gansu, so northwest China. It was found in the same sort of cache, or these sort of refuse piles that had Cang Jie pian in it. And it has a lot of features that are similar to the Cang Jie pian in terms of it seems to be 4 words per line. There's rhyming, it's 60 characters per chapter. However, the rhyme structure seems to be very different. So here we have the first 3 lines, it's rhyming after every 4th character, and then it switches up. And I'm not exactly sure how to read this yet. So it's not as strict in terms of the structural rhymes. But I've highlighted in blue the ones that I think should be rhyming. And then I might want to include some of these as well, but I'm not so sure. Again, inconclusive evidence here. R might have changed to N because we do, it might have changed to N because we do have a definitive R rhyming with a definitive N, but it seems like the R's are only found towards the end of the rhyme series. And so it's possible that maybe this is a different rhyme series than the ones above it, right? And if that's the case, then R has been specifically not changed to N. This is the last group of primers. They're called the Weili Jirdao sort of type of text. It's, sort of the way of being an official. These date mainly to the 3rd century BCE. So this is getting towards the end of the Qin. This is before the Han phonology technically. And they've been found in central China, Hubei. These are our earliest finds. There are 4 witnesses that are extant. One from Shui Di. There's another one in the Yalu Academy collection. We have another that was archaeologically excavated at Wangjiatai, but has since deteriorated. There's been a lot of mold, and it's not going to get published, I don't think. Another one whose data we're waiting for that's in the Peking University collection. What I did here, though, is I mostly just looked at I've compared the Shui Di with the Yalu Academy data in my paper that I've drafted for this. But right now, I think I'm just going to show the Shui Di materials. It's a much more complicated text. So it's not built around strict structural rhymes at all. But there seems to be something close to it going on with, for instance, we have here like gui, and then e and dre. Like these seem to be something of a structural rhyme. I've color coded it over here, right? That'd be those three. But there's a lot more sort of resonance that's going on in this passage. So based mainly on sort of shuai as the vowel, right? So these are all main vowels, shuai, 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 all over the place. And I guess the argument that I wanted to make with this is that if you look over this, it seems like it's read better if we assume that there's been a change from R to J, right? That just makes it more resonant. And if that's the case, that's really interesting because that suggests that there was a very early change of R to J. So what are sort of my conclusions from looking at all these primer datas? So Jie pian, it's possible that R has already changed to N based on the traditional division of rhyme series, but we can propose that there were further divisions within this longer series that retain a separation between R and N. So inconclusive. With the commentary to the Cang Jie, there is very strong, or at least very clear evidence of, in one spot, sort of an R word that's rhyming with both an N final and J file, and suggests to me that R has been preserved in that commentary. And that's really interesting because, especially for this commentary, it could be locally composed, and so that linguistic community retained R as a final. If we look at the Cang Jie base text, however, there's some suggestion of an R or of an possible N final in a J rhyme series, which might suggest then that R had been changed to J already for the base text by a linguistic community in an unknown location around the late 1st century BCE. However, there is that conflict that I pointed out where we still have a rhyme that incorporated ren, which is the voice velar nasal, and so I'm not sure how to handle that. Majawan, no significant addition, but then with the Wei Li Jerdao, again, there seems to be a suggestion of an R to a J change that happened very early, so in the 3rd century BCE. So that's basically what I've been thinking about and looking at. There's lots of individual issues that are in that data that I kind of put in that last column, so I'd love to talk about those at some point. And if anybody wants to look at the data, I'll send it to you and get your advice on it. But my concern is mostly, is there enough? Am I working with enough data to actually say anything? It's still very limited. And I did that on purpose because I want to be able to anchor these things in time and place based on manuscripts, but then I'm sacrificing sort of the robustness of my corpus. And again, this sort of perennial, sort of this enduring problem of how do we assign rhyming relationships? And I try to get around that by picking texts that have structural rhymes, but even with the primers, that's not always the case. And yeah, this presence of voice velar nasal in a lot of these series, especially the Ren and the Shui-Chen manuscript is bothering me. So thank you for tolerating my talk. Yeah.
The Cang Jie, so you said base text, and so this is not a transmitted text by exporter.
Yeah.
Or...
The only transmitted text from all these is the Jie pian. The Cang Jie, we have recompilations of this primer that were done in like late imperial period. And this is all the fad, right? And what those are based on are quotations of the Cang Jie that appear in other like reference works, right? So these Buddhist glossaries that I'm looking at. One of the reasons I got interested in them is because the Cang Jie is quoted all over in those. That data, however, is very different because it's, the Cang Jie says that this word means this or rhymes with this or is written that way. But then when we've found these new excavated manuscripts that for various reasons, we can fairly confidently identify this was the Cang Jie. Instead, it's just a listing of terms in these rhyming chapters, right? So clearly they aren't glosses in the Cang Jie saying this term is that, or this term's written that way. So all of these quotations that are being compiled by these late imperial scholars seem to be later early medieval interventions of interpreting the text. So it's useful data in a different way.
One of them is the base text, like and you said, okay, it's difficult to, from a critical point of view, reconstruct the genealogy, perhaps, something like this. Like, how do we know it's the base text? My question.
So really, there's only one manuscript where we see content that differs from all the other Cang Jie manuscripts, right? In a significant way. I mean, there's individual variants here and there and whatnot. And that's the Shui Chenza manuscript. And if you compare the Shui Chenza manuscript to these other witnesses that we have, we're discovering that. So if you look at one chapter in the so-called base text, it's a 4-character line. And then you compare it to the Shui Chenza, you have that same 4-character line, and then all of a sudden there's 3 insertions of new characters. And then it goes on to the next 4-character line that we see in the base text, right? So it's mostly a comparison between the two. That if we didn't have this Shui Chenza commentary, there wouldn't be any, like, it would just be the Cang Jie text, right? There wouldn't be a discussion of a base text versus a base text. What's remarkable, so, and I didn't talk about this, like pre-village teachers versus village teachers edition, but there is remarkable stability across all of these manuscripts. When I talk about 2 different editions, it's not that there's much content change between them. It's really just how they've divvied chapters. Whereas the earlier ones tend to be much longer chapters, 120 words together, right? Whereas the village teachers, inevitably, it's only 60 words per chapter. And I have a bunch of theories about that. I think it's related to studying on these prisms that can only hold a limited number of characters per. And yeah.
So I sort of already had a question, but the thing you just said kind of makes it more urgent or something. So each chapter has one rhyme, basically, right?
Mhm.
So then I guess on the one hand, if you have this 120 character, like, oh, let's say, let me try and use the correct term. The pre-village teachers, some of you can have 120 character chapters.
Mhm.
And then the village teachers had only 60 character chapters.
Mhm.
Like, does that mean that the village teachers is just half as long a text and they cut out the second half of each chapter?
They have more chapters.
Pardon?
They have more chapters. So basically, you
So
take
they-
120, you
it's
split it into
each
2.
chapter and a half.
Yeah, well, but it's a little bit more complicated than that, because in the pre-village teachers editions, at least in some of the manuscripts we have that relate to that, it's not always in intervals of 60 characters, right? You can have 150 or whatever. And so there is a problem in terms of, there was editorial intervention when the village teachers made their text, where there is content loss or content change.
So
Yeah.
this idea of like a whole chapter having a rhyme character, which I guess a rhyme category,
Mhm.
which I guess in the psychological literature is understood as like, what text is that referring to? Village teachers?
Well, it's kind of both, right? It's the same content across both pre-village and village.
No, but that's impossible, because I mean, like, if you have 120 character
Yeah.
chapter.
Oh, so there aren't unique rhymes for every chapter. One chapter participates in a single rhyme, but in the village teacher, you can have multiple chapters that all have the same sort of ending.
Oh, so it's not like they're trying to work through
No.
all the rhymes.
No.
Yeah, okay.
Do they have any theories about how this text was actually used? Like, what steps did the kids memorize this thing and then write it out and play with chanted or something and then write it out in characters?
So this is kind of what drew me to study this in the first place, is that if you look at, how do I put this? So the text itself begins by saying, this is for young children to memorize, and if they do, you can become a scribe. If you look at legal manuscripts on scribal training, while they don't mention this text by title, and I don't expect them to, because I don't think the title was on this text until after these scribal statutes were created, but it seems clear that this is participating in that same corpus. It's young adults, part of very, it's an older, it's a career tool, basically. It's not just, I'm first learning to read and write, and all these like little kiddies are. And if you look at the content too of later chapters, especially, I mean, it's really sophisticated, bizarre, archaic vocabulary. Like, you wouldn't expect your 6-year-old to be studying this. And then if you look at like historical annals, you'll see parts where they're, the historian is bragging about this emperor who, could write the scribal treatises, right? And it's like, why would an emperor like brag about it? Or you see a manuscript version of this buried with an aristocrat, this wealthy aristocrat. Like, why would you, I wouldn't bury myself with Dr. Seuss necessarily. Like, so there's a lot of different contradictions going on in terms of like, how was this text actually being, who was it for? And my sort of conclusion is that it was for these scribal families. It was used to test them and to make sure that they could enter into the bureaucracy, that they were equipped with literacy in a certain way. That these texts were very sort of strictly managed and controlled by those scribal families, but that during the late Western Han, it kind of gets out, right? And I have a whole theory on this. It's sort of like the militarization of the Han frontier, and he sends scribes out into the borders. They got nothing else to do. There's not strong controls. They start teaching it to peasants and whatnot. Yeah, exactly. And so like a lot of what we see is from these military outposts in Dunhuang, and it's shavings of repetitive copying and trying this. And it's usually the easier chapters, the chapters that have vocabulary that's simple to learn. And that once that happens, all of a sudden the prestige of this text drops off. It's no longer used for testing. It's simplified, which becomes the Jizhou Pian. You see there's a lot of overlap in the content. There's discussions in the historical treatises that say this was sort of made off of the Cang Jie Pian, but it's shorter and it's easier. And that the more prestige text becomes these Confucian classics. So, and we have like 18 different caches that include the Cang Jie Pian now. The very first discovery of it was by R.L. Stein in the early 20th century. And it was identified shortly after that by Wang Guowei, Luo Zhenyu. They sort of hypothesized that it was the Cang Jie Pian, and because there is this opening to the text, it's Cang Jie Zuo Shu Yi Zhao Hu Si, right? And so there's a convention in early China where texts are often titled after their initial characters or characters in the first sentence, right? So that's sort of the idea popped in. A lot of these, so there's another sort of lots of discoveries in the 30s in the Northwest with Zhu Yan. Fragments of this text seem to appear in there. But really sort of like the big moment was in the, 1970s, Fuyang, Shuanggu, yeah, 70s. Yeah, 77, right? And that was the first time when we got one of these manuscripts in a tomb that was a grave good. It's very fragmentary, but it's sort of a longer version, and we can start to piece out the content a bit more.